Hey everyone, Isabelle Fox here, and in today's lesson we're going to be talking about how to swiftly stack your savings again and again each week so that you never blow all your money. Now, who loves money? Most of us get into this industry with a big driving force and one of the big motivators to make a lot of money. And let's face it, there are almost no other industries that you can walk into with zero training, zero qualifications, zero startup funds, and make a lot of money in a short period of time. As a result, though, many of us get into a bad pattern of making a lot and then having nothing to show for it because we very quickly blow it all. And we're going to go through today exactly how that happens and why it happens, so that you get a bit of an objective view of this cycle that you may be stuck in. And once you understand kind of what cycle you're in, it will give you power to help overcome it. So that's the first thing. I remember being 18 years old and walking into a brothel and coming out after 6 hours with more money in a 6-hour shift than I would make in 2 weeks at my normal government job. So it was incredibly exciting. I actually still have a photo of that stack of money. I remember going home at like 6 a.m. and laying it out and being just totally in awe. But I also remember that it didn't really last very long, and it took me another 3 years of going through a vicious cycle of work, spend, before I started to realize, hey, I don't want to live like this, that this isn't why I got into this industry. And I started to come up with methods of how to avoid doing this. So let's start by talking about what I have come up with, a term called the Confetti Money effect. And this is the tendency for sex workers to earn thousands of dollars in a short period of time, blow it all on seemingly nothing, then struggle to still pay their rent and advertising fees. Now, you can't find this in the actual dictionary, but this would be published, I imagine, in the big book of escort lingo one day when maybe I release it or something like that. So if you've been in the industry for long enough, you're probably really familiar with this. Either you're doing it, you've done it, or you see friends who have done it. If you are really, really new, if you can be super aware of this straight away, that will really serve you. So let's talk about the typical life cycle of a sex worker's finances. I fell into this trap, like I said, at the age of 18, and I continued on in it till about 21. And most girls that I work with tend to go through this at some time too. So let's talk about what happens. Let's start at box 1. Generally what happens is you begin with $0 and you're super stressed by your inability to pay your bills. Then you move to box 2. You start working really hard. You're hustling all hours of the day and night to pay those bills with excess dollars left as well. Box 3. You slowly start spending money on extra rewards or gifts to oneself for working so hard and because there is leftover cash. So you've paid all your bills, you've been working super hard, you've got this money left over, so you think, what the hell, I'm going to buy this XYZ item, or I'm going to go out to this XYZ dinner. Box 4. You begin to get tired and burnt out from working so hard. You need greater and greater material rewards to motivate yourself to work. So basically you buy more stuff, generally nicer and more expensive. Box 5. Crash from working too much for too long and stops working entirely or minimally for any period of time, or something happens to require time off, i.e. health problems, or there are personal issues that make sex work too complicated. That could be partner, that could be family, that could be another job getting in the way. Box 6. Has dramatically reduced income or zero income for an extended period of time and burns through savings to cover bills and to keep up with a new, more luxurious level of lifestyle. Box 7. You have $0, you're depressed, you're anxious and stressed, and you're desperate to earn again, but you actually feel like you can't. So you kind of linger in this box 7 for a while before you eventually move to box 1 again, where you finally get the energy because of your amount of stress and your inability to pay your bills, and you go back and start it all over. So let's talk about this in a little bit more detail here. Obviously, starting with $0 is a pretty undesirable place to be. And when you're feeling that stress and you start to be forced to pay your bills, you have no choice but to start hustling really hard. It's kind of a similar, imagine like a yo-yo dieter, people that crash diet. This is like the similar situation or the similar effect. Basically, you start working really hard, earning a lot of money, But because you don't have good habits in place, you might pay off your bills at first, but you'll start to blow some of the extra money because you haven't really gotten the habit of saving. Just like somebody who might lose a lot of weight in a period of time when they're really motivated, but then they go back to their usual eating pattern because they're not really motivated. Sorry, not motivated, but they don't really have the habits to keep eating well to maintain their physique. So the same thing happens here. You work really hard, you pay your bills, you buy extra things. As a result of working too hard, just like with crash dieting, it's usually not sustainable. So imagine you're working in a brothel. It's not very sustainable to be doing 5 nights a week of the 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift. There are very few people who can keep that up. There certainly are some people who can, but most people I found can't do that sort of workload for a very long period of time. So eventually you'll crash. And when you crash, it's not like you just go from working 5 nights to, I'll just scale back to 2 or 3. When you crash, you really crash. You stop working. You do extremely, extremely minimal amounts of work. Perhaps if you're a private worker, you even just turn off your phone entirely because you can't handle the stress of seeing a booking and then knowing that you're not going to take it. I also see girls go in for shifts and then not spend very long there before they have to leave, or cancel a shift just before they're supposed to come in. Or in the private world, for instance, cancel a booking just before they're supposed to meet them. So they just create messy situations where they ultimately aren't getting paid. Also, because of the nature of sex work, I found that a lot of girls, when they're working excessively, end up developing some sort of female health problem. This usually refers to a cycle of thrush and BV. It's really nasty, and once it starts, it's really hard to kick, and obviously really difficult to work during that time as well. So you might find that you have a few days really bad and you just cannot work at all. Then you recover, and because you're desperate for money, you go and slam yourself again, and one day later you're back where you were and you again have to take time off work. So that also becomes its own little mini cycle. 2, referring to box 5 here, along with the health problems. Given the nature of sex work, it can be really hard to keep up a high volume of sex work at all times, depending on your lifestyle. So if you have a partner who doesn't know what you do, or perhaps you are single and then you start dating somebody, or perhaps you live with family, or perhaps you have another job where the obligations and responsibilities increase, it can become practically difficult to actually keep up a high workload. So again, the same thing happens. You go from having a big amount of income and spending a lot because you don't have good habits, to all of a sudden not having much of an income with bad habits, so you still spending the money that you were spending before, but you don't actually have the income to support it. So what can you do to become a smart saver who can comfortably take time off work, buy nice things, and still pay all their bills on time? So just know, guys, that it doesn't have to be this way. It may seem like it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that you just have no choice but to get involved in because of the nature of sex work, but it doesn't actually have to be like that. Remember why you came into this job. You wanted to increase your financial opportunities, and you can do that by developing smart habits. So let's talk about what they are. Step 1 is you need to change your mindset. And let's go through a few points here related to changing your mindset. Firstly, recognize that there will most likely be a time where you want to exit the sex industry and therefore lose the income it provides altogether. Now, I stress most likely here because I realize that there are some people who stay working in the sex industry for the majority of their working years, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. The only reason I say most likely is because the majority of people won't do that. The majority of girls will go in and out of the industry for something of an 8 to a 10-year period, and then they'll stop altogether. And there are a few options in the sex industry to kind of move up the ranks. In some other businesses, for instance, corporate businesses, you can get promoted to different parts of the business. In sex work, it doesn't really work like that. You're pretty much a service provider and then you stop. There are a few people who choose to take steps outside of actual sex work but remain in the industry. So the time that you spend in the industry doesn't really translate to skills in other fields that you can really put on paper. So it's very difficult to walk into a corporate job after working in the sex industry for 8 years and say, I've been working in the sex industry for 8 years, these are the skills I've accumulated. So there isn't that kind of ladder effect with sex work, so you have to keep that in mind. There will be a time where you stop entirely and the income won't transform into another source of income the way it does in other jobs. Secondly, you want to make the firm decision to be able to have the power to do that when you want. Don't be forced to continue on in a job you may no longer want to do for any reason because you can't afford to leave. Now, this is a problem that just the majority of the population has. A lot of people in this world are forced to stay in jobs that they don't want to do. Even though I'm a firm believer that sex work is an occupation in the same way that all other jobs are an occupation, there is an element of it that makes it more difficult perhaps than working at a desk job for an extended period of time if you don't like it. If you really have come to dislike sex work or really want to stop, it's a very difficult job to force yourself to do when you really don't want to be there. It's not a nice place to be. I've been in it for periods of time myself where I was really burnt out and just didn't want to be working, or perhaps was going through some personal stuff and didn't have the emotional energy to give to other people, or had physical problems and didn't have really the right physical state to be working so much, but I had to stay because I hadn't developed any financial baseline. I didn't have any other options and I hadn't made good choices, and that's really not a place that you want to be in. It's not nice. I've seen a lot of girls go through it. They end up becoming quite bitter and unhappy. You don't want to be like that in any area of your life, but especially regarding sex work, you don't want that to become you. And lastly, learn to think long-term about your finances. Just small savings today will eventually accumulate to bigger savings that give you options down the road. And that's really what a lot of girls get into sex work for, is they want to create options for themselves. So don't forget that in your excitement of earning a lot of money or of spending money on a lot of things. Remember why you started. Think long term. Don't just think about this week, how many clients did you get? Think about what you're going to do in 5 years. Now, when you're 18, I know it can be hard to think about what you're going to do when you're 28. But if you're 24 or 25 and you've already been working for 4 to 5 years, this is a really good time to start taking responsibility of your mindset and mature a little bit and think about what you want to be doing in 5 years from now, not just today. Also, guys, changing your mindset and keeping these things in mind will help you when it comes to doing the next practical steps that we're going to talk about. So if you have a clear understanding of why you want to make a change, it will be far easier to do that. It's really difficult to force yourself to do something when you don't really understand the benefits behind why you should do it. Step 2, track what you earn. Keep a record of what you earn each week and every week. Make a habit every Sunday to track these figures, then discover your weekly or monthly average earnings. You may need to track these figures over a 3-month period to come to a realistic figure. So each Sunday, I actually have a Google spreadsheet, and at first I actually just kept it on my phone. It wasn't any fancy method about it. Not that a Google spreadsheet is very fancy, but I started when I began to do this, just writing down every Sunday from my diary what I had done and how much I had earned. And then I would calculate for that week. And then at the end of the month, I would calculate what I had made in a month. Given the erratic nature of sex work, I suggest that you do this for 3 months. Then you take those figures each month and you figure out on an average what your 3-month income is. You could even be even more broad and do this over 6 months, but 3 months is a good way to start so you get some quicker answers. If you just do it for 1 month, it's probably not the best reading because it could have been a quiet month. You might have been unwell. You might have had family come to stay with you so you couldn't work. There are a bunch of reasons. So I really do recommend a 3-month period. Step 3 is track what you spend. Similar to what you do with your incomings, you need to do the same with your outgoings. Keep a record firstly of your set bills. These are the easy ones. You should know what they are. If you don't, find out what they are. Keep a record of your set extra spendings. Dinners, shopping, leisure, coffee. Then work out your average weekly or monthly expenses. So every time I spend money on something now, I just write it in a note in my phone. And then at the end of the week on a Sunday, I will go through and figure out how much I've made. Now how much I've spent, sorry. This is a pretty meticulous method. So even if you just start with your set bills and guesstimate what your extra spendings would be in a week and a month, then you'll have good figures to go off. Obviously, it's going to change all the time. We're really looking for average figures here, so don't get too hung up on per dollar amounts. Step 4, and this is the most important step, is pay yourself first. You should now know your regular average income and your average expenses. The difference that's left over is your potential savings and what I like to call your future fund. Now, what you want to do is select either a percentage minimum of 10% or a minimum dollar amount. And each week or month, whatever is preferential to you and how you get paid, put that money into an entirely separate account before you pay anything else. So at the end of every week, I will figure out how much I've made. And I now have a set percentage that I put away. And on the Monday, after I've calculated on the Sunday, I will go to the bank and I'll put in that set amount. It's to a separate account that I don't use every day, that I don't have access to on my internet banking. Do not touch this money. Even if you can't pay your rent, pretend it isn't there. When you can't pay a bill, work out another way to pay it. You can ask for extra time here, guys. You can do another job that might motivate you to do that extra job that you didn't feel like doing. You can borrow money from a friend. Your freedom fund essentially doesn't exist. It doesn't exist until you have made a calm, rational decision that it does. When you've been able to think it over and decide to put that money towards something meaningful, not just because you've been in Louis Vuitton and seen something new. Prioritize paying yourself for a secure future before you pay other people or buy gifts or spend money on socializing. We're also used to giving our money away to other people before we give it to ourselves. And I don't mean give it to yourself by buying something for yourself and then having, say, a bag, because you're not giving that money to yourself. You're giving that money to Louis Vuitton, or you're giving that money to the store. That isn't actually going to you. We even pay our bills before we pay ourselves. So our money goes to our landlord, or to our phone company, or to the electricity company before it goes to ourselves. Learn to prioritize yourself first. So before you pay your rent, pay yourself. And like I said on my previous page, find another way to pay the rent. Just pretend that that money wasn't there. So I will ask for extensions. I've done that so many times. Just an extra week, because I know the next week I'll motivate myself to go and do another job. Or I'll borrow it from a friend, because I know that if I borrow from a friend, I will be far more likely to pay them back on time than I will to pay it back to myself in an IOU. Do this for long enough, and one day you will have a considerable nest egg that gives you stability and options. Start with a small figure and slowly increase over time. So I said to start with 10%. I think that 10% is a good minimum. So what that means is that if you find that you on average earn $2,000, $2,000 a week, you'll be saving roughly $200 a week, which really adds up to be something considerable over the course of a year. If you really feel for some reason that 10% is too hard for you, then even go as low as 5%. What matters at first is just starting, and then as you go, this will become easier and you can slowly increase the figure over time. Alright, so there you have it, guys. That is my method that I use to make sure that I save my money instead of blowing it each week. I've taken many girls through this method. It can be hard at first, it does require a bit of discipline, but you will reap the rewards if you actually put it into action. And once you do it, it will become very easy, because you'll just, in a very systematic way, put that money away each Sunday or Monday, and then it will be there, and before you know it, you'll have 20 grand, you'll have 30 grand, you'll have 50 grand. So even though it may seem a bit daunting at first, make it easy with a small amount and just get started. I'm looking forward to speaking with you in our next lesson. Hit me up anytime on isabelle@foxgirls.com.au. I'd really love to hear your feedback about how this works for you. And stay safe till then. Bye.